I want to introduce Jane, who's going to go first, Jane Thurfield Brown, who is the Director of Student Services at the University of Connecticut Law School and an Assistant Clinical Professor here at the Child Study Center. And we have been working, seeing cases together over the last year or so, which has been very interesting, and have done some conferences together. And as you're going to hear, our focus today is college students on the autism spectrum, which is a very interesting new topic and a new issue. At Yale at the moment, we have several undergraduates who have self-identified as having autism, which is great. It's presented some issues around the country, but it's a delightful new problem to have. And so we're going to hopefully put this up on the web as a resource. And let me just say, as I introduce Jane, I also want to thank a lot of people, certainly Yale for providing us with the infrastructure for doing this, but also the FAR Fund and the Taylor Family Foundation, which gives us some financial support to do this lecture series. That being said, Jane is going to start, and then I'm going to follow up, and then we'll have some time for questions. Jane.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you all for coming. I do a few things, and I come to this college work both personally and professionally. I've been in disability services in higher ed for 35 years, working with students with all kinds of disabilities, and about 20 years ago started seeing students who really didn't fit what their diagnosis said and started looking further. It was about 15 years ago that Fred and I started having some conversations about could this really be, at the time it was Asperger's or high-functioning autism that we were seeing with all these college students who were usually diagnosed with OCD or a learning disability. What we want to talk to you today is more how to prepare students for college and how do we know when they're getting ready for college and what kinds of things we need. When I say I come at this very personally and professionally, we're a Fragile X family. We have 3 children, and my youngest is a 24-year-old who is severely autistic. He's not going to college. But because I live in that world of parents of kids with autism, I see a very different kind of experience for parents who are going through special education systems versus my professional experience of working with college students with disabilities. So with that, we really want to talk about what life is like after high school, because many families are really thinking, but just if he or she can get a degree, if this young person can get a college degree, then everything will be okay. And that's really not the way we want to think. We really need to think towards, we need people to be independent, successful adults. That's the key rather than just getting that degree. Can I ask, I know a lot of you are students, do we have any parents here today? Parents of folks on the spectrum? Okay. So at graduation from high school, everything changes, and we're going to talk about this in about the 20 minutes I have, so we're going to talk very briefly. The laws change. Who's in charge changes drastically. The expectations of the individual really change. It goes from a real valley to a very high peak. The temptations for the student change drastically, as do the consequences. And what many families are not prepared for is the accommodations in college change drastically. Once you're out of high school, there is no special education. So who's the driver in all this? In middle and high school, the parents and guardians have to be driving this whole charge. The teachers and counselors really drive that IEP and make those deliverable accommodations happen. But once you get to college, the student is the driver. Even if the parents act as guardian or are legal guardian, they cannot call the shots at college. The student has to be the one in charge of their education. The way we like to put it is in middle school and high school, the parents, the guardians, the teachers, the guidance counselors, the social workers and clinicians, they are advocate and CEO of that student's education. But once the student gets to college, they are their own advocate and CEO. And what we're trying to impress is that families need to give that student time to learn and to train to become advocate and CEO of their own education. In 2000, there were only 2 college programs in this country for students with autism. Many disability service offices and colleges really did not know about autism, what it was, or how students with autism could function on their campuses. But today, in 2016, there are at least 25, and by fall there will be about 30 to 32 programs specifically for college students with autism, and there's even more with what we call enhanced services. There's not a full-blown program, but colleges do some specific things for students with autism, and all of those are on our website, collegeautismspectrum.com. The highest numbers right now this year for the 15-16 academic year is the University of Texas at Dallas, which works with about 1,000 students with disabilities in general, 375 of whom have autism, documented and disclosed to disability services. That 375 is the highest number in the country. So what do students need to be ready for college? This comes from a grant called Technology for Transition from SUNY Buffalo. This was developed in 1979. If you notice, it looks like it was developed specifically for students with autism, but this was in general what all students needed way back 35, 36 years ago. The major skills needed by entering college students: study habits, being prepared for class, being organized, and understanding classroom etiquette, which many faculty complain that neurotypical students have problems with today. Social skills, being able to interact appropriately, being able to interact in social situations, dealing with feedback on papers and exams, that peer pressure that everybody has to deal with, and independent living skills. Students need to be able to structure their environment from that very structured high school setting where everything is very locked in all day. You move to a college setting where only 12 to 15 hours a week are structured for the student. And we know that students with autism like structure and don't do very well with unstructured time, which is the downfall for a lot of folks with autism at college. Using leisure time. Do I know when to get off the video games and start studying? Do I know when to turn off the TV and start studying? That's difficult for any typical college-age student, 18 to 22. For the student with autism, even more difficult. Articulating medical needs. How many of our students go to a doctor, make their own appointments, or go independently to a doctor before going to college? That's often very challenging for families to deal with. And then your basic adapted living skills, transportation, cooking, laundry, all those things that you have to be able to deal with once you get to a college campus. So what's really important for college success? What I hear from families regularly, 5 to 10 times a week, but Dr. Brown, you don't understand how bright this person is. And I understand that you can be incredibly bright and still struggle with things at college. The important things for college success are, number one, resilience. Do you have that ability to bounce back when things are tough? That social communication and interaction. Can you function in a classroom, in a residence hall, in a group? Executive function, that future planning. Can I put things together to get those assignments done, to juggle multiple assignments at once? Bless you. Self-regulation. If things are bad and I'm upset, can I get myself back on track? And then academic ability, which certainly is in the mix, but it's not the number one most important thing needed in order to be successful in college. We've all seen people that we really didn't think would be successful in college be able to get through college because of the other qualities that they had, even though they might struggle academically, where some of our students with brilliant academic minds struggle even more than those other students. So how do we build this resilience that's so important? One of the hardest things to do for students with any disability, but especially those on the spectrum, is not accommodating every need. We so badly want to help. We so badly want to make this person successful that we often do just what we shouldn't. We eliminate all the risk. We make sure that person can't fail. We do lots behind the scenes to make sure that that self-esteem stays intact. But what we're doing then is taking away that person's ability to learn those problem-solving skills that are so important. And many of our students are graduating from high school not having learned how to solve their own problems. We need to avoid asking why questions. Why did you do that? Why did you let that happen? And instead ask how. How are you now going to make this work? You didn't do the math assignments for the last 2 weeks. How are you going to make this work and pass that class? Letting the student figure out how to make things work rather than pushing the why. Why would you do that? Or why would you do that to me? Which a lot of us as parents get involved in sometimes, thinking it's more an interpersonal thing. We have to let our kids make mistakes. And it's hard to do. It's even harder for a student with autism. We have to let them make mistakes and figure out what happens after the mistake. Because we all know that mistakes are going to happen. And that if we try and make all that too smooth and the road too smooth for students with autism, that them becoming independent, successful adults is a much harder journey. That they need time while they still have support of family around to be able to make those mistakes. Help the students manage their emotions. Don't manage them for them. Help teach the student to manage those emotions and help know what to do during a meltdown or when things get sensorily overwhelming. And then most important is to model that resiliency. I meet with lots of families to talk about college options and college counseling. And often the families are so stressed and overwhelmed by this process that I can't imagine how the student can get through the process. Because if they're looking at the parent for guidance and that parent is falling apart, how is the student going to get through this process and this long transition? So we do know by 2020 we're going to have 500,000 new adults who will have turned 21 with autism. And this is from the Autism Society of America a couple of years ago. But we know from the numbers being identified and the prevalence through the CDC right now that by 2020 we will have a new 500,000 adults looking for services. So what do we know that's changed and what do we have to do to prepare for this large group? We know that the students are coming to college less prepared in some areas. Again, academically, they may be very well prepared, but they may be much less prepared in some of those other social and adaptive skills. We know the parents are much more involved than they were a decade ago and much more involved than even a few years ago. But we also know that colleges are much more prepared. Where it used to be no one's heard of autism at a college campus and no one imagined a student with autism could be a college student, now every college has many students with autism, every college in the country, and some colleges are doing more than others. One of the important things to realize, and that we certainly want people that are helping to transition folks from high school to college to understand, is how different the laws are. I say again because it bears repeating, after high school there is no special education. There is no special education in college for students. The laws change drastically. Under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it's a federal law of educational entitlement. The parent and the school are responsible and ensures success in that you can't fail out of special education. If you are a mandated special ed student and you have an IEP, they can't come to a parent and say, sorry, your student has failed out, they can't come to school anymore. That's not allowed. It's educational entitlement and it's based on evaluation and remediation. And the school will give a diagnostic label, one of the 13 federal categories. Once you have gotten either that high school diploma or certificate of completion, you now move over to the ADA, which is now known as the ADAAA, the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act. This is not federal law. This is civil rights legislation of equal access. Totally different, and most people have no idea when their student graduates from high school and goes to college that these are totally different laws. My role as a disability service provider is not to ensure success. We give permission to succeed and permission to fail like every other college student by leveling the playing field. So it's my job as disability service provider to read documentation, evaluate the student in a way that will level them to the other students in class and give them an equal advantage. Not the best possible accommodations so that they can succeed in the best way possible, because we'd love to do that for every student, but that would mean telling the organic chemistry professor that every student needs double the time that they're going to give them for an exam. And the professors say, no, this is what I'm examining. And the professor in college has that academic right. The student is now responsible rather than the parent and the school. So when the parents say, no, 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 but I'll have to talk to the faculty, the student has to talk to the faculty. It's a totally different model. And we provide reasonable accommodations, and that reasonable is very important, based on functional impairment and impairment in a major life activity. Totally different laws that most families that have a special education student in high school aren't being informed about. And all of this kind of comes as a shock when that student moves on to college. Students in the world of college services must be otherwise qualified. They have to be admitted to the college, able to attend class like other students, and they have to meet all the academic and behavioral standards. Nothing gets changed because a student has a disability. And that last piece is very important. The student has to be able to advocate for themselves with minimal assistance. So what do we do now? We need to prep our students to understand their assessment, understand their strengths and weaknesses, because the mom and dad and psychologist are not going to be in meetings with the student and their faculty or their disability service providers. The students really need to understand how they learn and how they learn best, and they need a chance to practice disclosing to teachers and staff in the high schools before they get to college. Students need to be able to do the following things. Number one, wake themselves up in the morning. You wouldn't believe how many families are still waking up their high school students, and they get to college and can't understand why the students can't get to class. Students need to be able to wake themselves up. Before they leave high school, they should be running those IEP meetings because they need to know what their accommodations are about. They need to practice scheduling their own appointments. Mom and dad aren't going to email the professor to make an appointment for you. The student needs to practice things like that, refilling their own meds, making sure they have a good time management system. And we find students really aren't having enough opportunities for volunteer jobs before they leave high school, and it's a crucial, crucial step. And those independent living skills are really important. I really like to reinforce this to families. We are not applying to college. The student is applying to college, and sometimes we lose sight of that. We know that from about 5 years ago, the Journal of Pediatrics did a study and found that 66% of young adults with autism were not working or continuing their education after high school. Only 1 in 3 folks on the spectrum graduating from high school were doing anything outside the home. And we need to change that. With the numbers coming up, we need to change that drastically, and we need more of us working with young adults on the spectrum. We have lots of folks working with children on the spectrum. We need to increase the young and adult service providers and clinicians. So how do we improve? We need to start earlier. We need to start this transition before students step onto the college campus or before they graduate from high school. We need realistic, supported transition, not just a plan that's in an IEP and then we set the student off. And we need real collaboration between the high schools, the clinicians, the family, and the college service providers, all together to make a successful transition for the students. I think we're going to take questions after, so I'll finish there and ask Fred to come up.
Thank you, Jane. And I'm going to be planted in front of the microphone and use my outside voice. And so I'm going to follow up, and I hope without much in the way of, let's see, oh gosh, which one of it is? Let's hope it's this one, the slideshow from start. So I think there may be a little bit of duplication, but hopefully not too much with Jane. And as you heard, she and I have been seeing folks, which has been very interesting, students and their families. And I would agree very much with Jane. We are not applying to college. The student is applying to college. Let me say, to set the stage for this, given the number of people we're going to see in the explosion, there's a range of options for people after school. One is vocational programs. We now actually have a number, as you heard from Jane, of supported transitional programs. We also have a network around the country of very good community colleges. Often people can live at home, go to school during the daytime. Gateway here in New Haven, for example, would be an example of that. Then we have traditional four-year colleges, and we have something like 5,000, I think, around the country. These vary tremendously. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that. And for some people, they're going on to graduate and professional school. If we have time at the end, I'll give you some examples of the kinds of things we're seeing. The good news, colleges came out of monasteries. Why is that good news? Monasteries are very structured. Things happen on time. You go to prayer at a certain time. And it's sort of a legacy of our monastic roots that we use a lot of routines. Things are available. If you show up at the lunch place, there will be food. If you show up at the library, there are books, there's stuff. And to some extent, and this varies tremendously from school to school, you can minimize social interaction, but it's impossible to totally, absolutely get rid of it. So it's an important issue. At the same time, there are rules, as is true of monasteries as well. And if you violate those rules, you're out. And as you heard from Jane, if you're a special ed student with an IEP, you're not out. You're going to be there through high school. College, you make an inappropriate comment to a lady often. That's going to get you kicked out very quickly. Education matters. Any kind of post-secondary education helps people get a job. That's the good news. And also, students who have disabilities but who get a bachelor's degree, on average, for all students with disabilities, and it may be slightly different for people in the autism spectrum, they get jobs at about the same rate as their neurotypical peers. But it takes a lot to get people through college sometimes. There are many accommodations that are available. As you heard, this is different than high school. And the student has to ask for these, him or herself. There's untimed tests, tutors, note takers. There's a lot of computer supports these days, text to speech, speech to text. You can dictate to your computer. You can use PowerPoint to outline papers. Social issues, issues with peers, the need for long-term life coaching supports. If we have a chance, I'll tell you an example at the end of that kind of thing. And we need mental health supports, especially for the student who's actively getting mental health supports in high school, whether that's counseling from the school psychologist, whether it's medications for anxiety or depression. People need to keep that in mind when they're going to look at schools. What are the resources both at the college and in the community? And also, as you heard, the student has to be very involved in self-advocacy. I cannot tell you the number of times parents say, but the college won't talk to me. That's because you're not part of the equation. You are paying the bills. But the student has the right to privacy, and only if the student gives up that right can parents be involved, obviously also in the very rare exception of horrible emergency situations. The easiest thing in my experience to deal with is helping people understand that untimed tests are helpful to our population. Often processing speed is slow. You can also often demonstrate that on psychological testing. You can say, look at this. This requires an accommodation. Problem areas. In my experience, essay questions. What are you going to do with this? Respond to this poem of Shakespeare's. And people get very literal, and they have trouble understanding Shakespeare is not talking about what it looks like he's talking about. He's talking about something else. And usually it's love and sex, which is another problem. English courses and papers following up on Shakespeare are often hard for people to get. Group works and labs. The student can know so much he can overwhelm his neurotypical lab partner, or conversely be totally left out. Classroom behavior, not having your hand up all the time. I've had people who felt badly they were made fun of by the professor in their course because they were always asking questions. Judicial affairs, and again, especially around sexual issues, also around aggression, things people might think of, and because they think it, they say it. Talking about Osama bin Laden, talking about being worried about bombs. That's the kind of thing that will get you picked up and into trouble very quickly. The kinds of academic supportive programs, some are very minimal. This is, I would say, probably the most common model around the country. People at the college level are giving the minimal amount of service for what they can, given what they can do. Moderate, a little more extensive with some coordination of services, and we have more of these programs around the country. And we have this small handful of very intensive, sometimes college prep, sometimes beginning programs. Often there will be a mix of academic classes and some special classes, life skills classes. How do you take the bus? How do you have a bank account? How do you make a doctor's appointment? College residential life, obviously, if you can live in a residence, you're going to have a different experience than living at home. Commuter issues raise some problems. I'll talk about those in a second. Residential issues. How do you have friends? How do you socialize? How do you use your free time? You can't play all, Minecraft or whatever it is, 24/7. right? You have to study some of the time. Coping with roommates, this can be really hard. Suite mates is a little simpler, but even that has its own challenges. Laundry and personal hygiene, I worked with a student here for a couple of years, and at the beginning of his freshman year, he was sending every other week a big box home to his mom by UPS of his dirty clothes because he could not tolerate the laundry room. And even at 2 a.m. in the morning, people are in the laundry room. They're hanging out, they're drinking, they're smoking pot, they're doing stuff. And it's really hard to cope with. Sleep patterns, often our kids have a long history of sleep patterns problems, and they're sleeping in the daytime, they're not, and that's not going to be compatible with college life. Relationships and understanding the rules, this is really one of the hardest things. The good news is we do have people who are doing better and better. I know of a number of people now who are married and have families, which is fantastic, but it's a hard road to get there. Supporting the students, as you heard, we want the student to be involved in this. You can provide therapy and counseling. You can teach social skills. You can teach organizational and study skills. And again, you want to give people tools to do this on their own. We can provide targeted assistance for certain problems, reading comprehension and so forth. And there's a lot of technology. There's more and more that's coming out all the time. And the reference list at the end will have a list of some of the technology resources that people can use. You can alter the learning environment by using all kinds of aids, proofreading programs, note takers. You can allow flexibility in terms of testing procedures. I had one student who fell apart when a pop quiz came up. He was just a basket case. He couldn't take the anxiety. We worked it out with the professor. He was the only student that got a warning the night before, of a pop quiz at midnight, and he couldn't do any more study. But he knew it was coming up. So it wasn't as anxiety provoking, and this was worked out with the professor, and it worked fine. And providing tutoring and special mentors can be very helpful in many ways, not just in the academic sense. As you heard, people have to be self-advocating, they have to be motivated, they already have to have good study habits, they have to have classroom etiquette, and they have to have a whole range of skills around executive functioning, planning, time management, not getting stuck on one thing. The student who's got to do this English essay just can't get off of it and keeps working and working and working. For that student, he needs to work out. He has an hour, there's a timer. When it's done, he moves on to the next thing, no matter what he's done. Having alternative strategies and approaches, thinking about other ways to kind of work around the problem. Often when our students hit a roadblock, they're right there with the roadblock, and they don't see, well, you go left or right. Social and interpersonal, things like conversation, humor. One of the problems we have often is people don't understand idiosyncratic language, people don't understand the student's idiosyncratic language. When they talk about something in a very unusual way, nobody has a clue. Conversely, our students will have trouble with things like figurative language, idioms, sarcasm, irony. It'll be lost on them. Sometimes they will be laughed at when they're not meaning to make a joke. I give the example of someone who works for us doing copying. The first time I had an interaction with him, I left him a thing to copy with a yellow sticky saying, "Could you make 3 copies, Joe?" The next day I come back, there's no copies, but he's written yes on the paper. He could make 3 copies. He's responded to the literal question. But that's the kind of thing that students will laugh at, and the student with autism won't understanding it. As you heard, emotion management, independence, regulating your own self and time and space with your feelings, understanding your feelings, things like transport, how to get around in the bus system. Time management, laundry, cafeteria shopping. Laundry and cafeteria are actually very difficult. They're very unstructured. There's a lot of social interaction. The good news and bad news for students thinking about a program, there are a lot of programs out there, and there are more coming down the pike. And that's great. They vary in many different ways. The student and family need to do their homework. This involves going online, asking for materials, and visiting programs. The strategies for finding a good fit for the college: start early, use online searches, ask for the materials, look at summer programs. See if there's something you could do and spend time in the summer to get to know the campus, to get a sense of what it's like, especially after you're admitted. And there's a whole question of when you want to disclose, if ever. Many of our students say, nobody will realize I have a problem. And they'll say it like that, and you realize, okay. They'll know it the first second that you open your mouth. Visiting the programs, having the student engage. As Jane said, this is the student's college experience, it's not the parents. Ask a lot of questions, have the students involved, and get a sense of the fit on campus. And you can't predict. I've had students who had great success at extremely small liberal arts schools in the middle of nowhere. And I've had students have great success at Big Ten colleges, many of which have great disability support programs. I've also seen the reverse. So keep in mind, you really need to think about goodness of fit. Having a vision thing that what we want, as you heard, is we want an adult who's self-sufficient, independent, and happy with their life. And it's not just the academics. That's the single most common thing parents don't get. Is it's not just how bright you are, it's how functional you are. And there are many different paths to adult independent and supports. So again, ask what's the best program for this student. How independent can the student be? Can he really handle a full-time college experience? Does it need to be part-time? Does he need to go to the junior college for a couple of years or even a year to get a sense of taking classes, taking 1 or 2 classes, how does it work? The residential living at home, if it's residential, visiting the college is critical to see what the options are. Also seeing what the support options are at the school, and schools vary tremendously in terms of the range of things available. Maybe somebody will ask Jane what her experience is at some of the best colleges in the country. We'll see if it's the same list as mine. Meeting the Learning Disability Support Officer. Again, you can decide whether you want to do this in advance or not, and whether you want to self-identify or not. Once you're in college, the student has to be the one, as you heard, to advocate for themselves and go ask for support. And look at the curriculum. Things like, is the language required? This is a very common thing. Language is going to be very difficult for many of our students. It can be a big deal to get an exception if the college has a language requirement. The visit, again, do your homework, meet the support staff, find out how responsive they are. Do they have a track record? Do they have experience doing this? Remember, college is not a right. The student's responsible for their behavior, their assignments, their independence, and students are really very quickly expelled, sadly, for bad behavior. I've had this experience several times now. People who will come up, they want to have a relationship with someone, they will be very polite, and they will make a very explicit request. And typically the second time they do that, they're out. And the student says, but I would never do anything to a girl without asking. And they're right, and the but is they're asking. And they don't know all the steps in between. Again, get a feeling of the campus, get out of the car. One of my favorite stories of taking our kids on college tours was we got to some little school in Maine, and my daughter says, I don't like this college, I'm not getting out. I said, what's wrong with the college? I don't like the town. Well, you haven't seen the college. No, you really want the kid to get out of the car and look at the college. Look also at how sophisticated the Learning Disabilities Office and officer is. Some of these people have very minimal training. Others have a lot of training. You look at somebody like Jane, she is an expert. So UConn is really covered at a very high level with somebody with an advanced degree in special ed. Other schools, the Learning Disabilities Officer may have a little bit of training in something, but not necessarily so relevant to this. Also, look at the mental health supports, the other kinds of services that might be available in the community. You can be at a very small school out in the middle of the sticks. There's a social worker comes in every other week. Maybe a shrink comes in once a month. If you have a student on medications who's really needing active social skills therapy, you need to take that on board. And also talk to other parents. Find out who's graduated from the college. Often when you go online, you'll find, you can type in the name of the college, graduates, but then get into it and discover, because you will find people who have had other kinds of disabilities. Pros and cons, two-year college. The pros, it's easier in some ways with open enrollment at a two-year school. You don't have to take a full load if you want. You can have a track record of success. You can get a lot of experience, and that can then take you to a more typical four-year college. Cons. Often these community colleges are less academically challenging. For the bright students, they feel badly. They're feeling like they already know more than the teacher. And at the same time, they're processing that their classmates know more than them socially. So this is a setup for them feeling depressed and isolated and lonely. And I've seen that happen, sadly. Transitional programs often look at supported employment and work skills. And as you heard, not just college, but thinking about getting people out so they can work independently. Things like time management, financial management, grocery shopping, laundry, home maintenance, getting involved in the community. Community supports can be very critical. Being involved in a church, a synagogue, a mosque, whatever it is. Being involved in community activities that you can participate in. People will know you. People will check up on you. You'll have a little community. The commonest problems in college, students are often unwilling to ask for help. The student has to ask for it. We can have a range of technology supports, but they're only helpful if they're implemented. You can have a computer, it just sits there, doesn't do you much good. The mental health issues, again, I would underscore, be aware of what the school offers and what's available in the community. There can be private services as well. This college may be more willing to provide academic supports if there's an advocate at school for the student. Challenges for mental health, the most common problems, depression, anxiety, and isolation. This has got to be about 50% of the students, in my experience, have some degree of this. Bullying can be a problem. People probably know the US stands sort of in the middle of the bullying pack around the world. If you're on the autism spectrum, your risk of being bullied is something like 40% at some point in your school career. If you have an additional problem like anxiety or depression, it goes up to about 70-75%. And again, have a sense of the campus and how much tolerance or intolerance there is of bullying. Stress management, psychotherapy approaches. There have been nice modifications of cognitive behavior therapy specifically for individuals with autism spectrum disorders. This can be great. You have to adopt a life coaching model, realizing after 10 sessions, even though your goal is to wrap the problem up in 10 sessions, this is a person who's going to have to come back and get help periodically, and to be open and flexible about that. I mentioned the disclosure issues and confidentiality are very complicated in this country. In Canada, if you're going to college, they will know ahead of time, well, this is a person who's had a diagnosis of ADHD or autism. In this country, no, not at all. And once you're in school, the mental health professionals and the college will keep everything private and confidential. And helping the college staff be aware that the student has some special needs and supports, but is interested in learning. And if the student really wants to learn, often the colleges are supportive. So what's the secret to intervention in this population? Be explicit. Tell your physics teacher you need extra time on tests. Let's write that down so you don't forget it. Let's put it in your organizer. Again, very explicit and very proactive. Again, you can't solve the problem of what he's got to say to the physics teacher, but he's got to know he's got to go do it, or he's going to flunk out. In summary, students need to work on self-awareness, advocacy. They need to self-identify to get special services. Often they can use the college experience as other people do to get onto independence in a job. You can become part of a network of other students. If you're somebody who goes to Yale, for example, you're networked in. This is a very social school. You're networked into all kinds of people you know around the world. Parents can help with the college search, but it's not their college search, and they have to own up to that. They have to learn when to be involved and when to pull back, and they do have to be available to the students. Not to say they're not still parents, they very much are. So I think we're going to have time for some questions. I want to thank everyone for their attention. My bulldog GIF won't work because I pulled up the wrong one. He usually falls asleep at this point, but I'll fix it in the slides that go on the YouTube. And we do have some references, and we'll update this as well. So let me stop there, and Jane can come up, and we'll see if we've got some questions. And we finished, as we thought, right on time. Okay, and Jane's got a mic, so she can stand.
Okay,
And
yes.
I can talk to this. Anybody got any questions?
Yes, in the back.
Jane, can you speak a little bit? You're about 3 minutes late, so.
That's
I
okay.
missed this part, please forgive me. We heard a lot about parents helping their children transition, about the needs on campus, the specific needs that students with ASDs will need on campus. But I know that you speak often about starting early in middle school and in high school.
Yes.
To prepare these students, because you can't plop them down on a campus and hope that the campus is going to have the tools to
Right.
support them, and it takes a long time to hone those skills. So
Right.
I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
I think that around the country, places are beginning to realize that we need to start earlier. I'm doing projects right now in Pennsylvania and Long Island, working with high schools, high school staff, parents, and students, and working with them to build a lot of the skills that Fred and I have talked about this morning, and simultaneously working with some of the area colleges and community colleges. So I think, but it's taken, and well, let's put it this way, I'm standing here in Connecticut, but I have to work in other states in order to, so I think it's taken probably a good 10 or 15 years to start getting this across to people. I think we had to have the pendulum go this way, that parents have had to advocate so strongly in order to get students what they have needed in order to get a good, solid education and move on to college. I think now the pendulum is swinging in a different way, not back necessarily, but now I really try and emphasize with parents what to advocate for. Because sometimes I have to say to parents, you're asking for more accommodation than my son, who's very low functioning on the autism spectrum and not going to college. You're asking for more accommodation than he would be getting in a setting. And if you're expecting that, how can that student go on to college? I talked to a family yesterday. Their student has a one-to-one aide all the way through senior year. And when I said, well, how will your student function without an aide? And they said, oh, no, the college will provide an aide for it. And I said, no, that's never going to happen. First of all, if your student were a quadriplegic in a motorized wheelchair, the college couldn't provide an aide. That's against federal law, personal service. That has to come from a different agency. There's no way for behavior and attention the college is going to. So I think parents need to hear this earlier so that they can assist in some of these independent living pieces. And I think families need the support. There isn't a lot of support out there for the families. And so a lot of what I keep doing in my work with high schools is saying, yes, we need to maybe change what we're providing to the student, but we need to support the family through this or it's not going to work. And that's where a lot of the disconnect is.
And if I could just add to that, it's interesting when you think about it. One of the problems, I've got some resources up here, we don't have a tremendous amount of good, solid scientific data. We have a lot of chapters and books, which is great. We know a lot already. This is not an area where there's a lot of peer-reviewed scientific papers. There's a handful. There's like 20 papers on autism and vocational supports. There's a handful, like I think 2, about suicide in adolescents and adults on the autism spectrum. I know it's a problem, but there's literally 2 papers, one of which is a review of the other paper. So it's that kind of thing is a problem. On the other hand, there's some very interesting data that make us feel like if we knew more, we'd have a better sense of what the problem area is. There's a paper from Sue White in her college, I think it's the University of Virginia Tech, actually, I think. Anyway, Sue White, they look at 700 students in the college, just randomly students, 700 kids, roughly, and they give them 2 measures of autism diagnosis. One's a quick and dirty autism screener, one's a little longer, the SRS is a dimensional screener, as I recall. Between 1% and 2% of this big group of kids qualified under 1 or 2 of these as being on the autism spectrum in terms of their difficulties. They were unidentified. So the question is, how do they get this far along without being unidentified? Also, we do come across occasional cases where the person in college, very high functioning people who's done very well, all of a sudden needs services and you realize what's gone on. The person has had some social skills, has done really pretty well, all things considered, but at college, sort of the level kicks up so much that that's when they need support. And again, it's a very interesting area. We need to know also about the students who've gotten through without supports. And again, that's a whole other very interesting package. I had one person I worked with who was in law school and wanted to be a public defender, and this was a mistake. And the reason was his client would say to him, well, I did the crime. And then he would say, well, we have to plead guilty. And he didn't get the point. No, that's not your job. Your job is to advocate for him to get him off. And so I helped him get into patent law, which is much better fit for him than being a public defender, which was a disaster. So it's that kind of thing. And also, if you're working individually with kids, as you know, I do on a limited basis, over the long haul, and you get to know them, small interventions can make a big difference. I have one student who's now at a school in Boston that will be nameless, but technology-oriented, and he came in with a state complaint. He wanted to have a girlfriend. We went through a whole thing with him. One of the things towards the end of the time I was working with him, he was going out on a double date, and he came in and he looked at me, which was unusual because he really didn't look at me. He said, Dr. Voltmar, my friend I'm going on this date with, he says he's got to take me to Macy's, and because I look like a geek. And Dr. Voltmar, do I look like a geek? I said, yes, you look like a geek. And he said, well, what can I do about it? So we got in this whole discussion, and this is a kid who came in every time with his top button buttoned, no tie. And I said to him, you know what, we're going to do something, and if your mom is mad at me, I'll pay for the shirt, but we're going to take off that top button with the scissors. Oh, I couldn't do that. I couldn't deface my clothing. I said, I'm willing to bet you money that if we do that, A, your mom won't mind, and B, you will come in next week with $10 to give me because I've won the bet. The people will tell you look cooler. And of course, I did get $10. But it's that kind of thing that's sometimes immediate feedback, helping the student learn, find out what other kids are listening to in terms of their music. Yes, it's not Wagner, but it's okay. That's what they're listening to. That's what you can then talk about, right? So it's that kind of stuff that if you're willing to work with a student can make a big difference in terms of fitting in. Mm-hmm. So tell us what the best schools are. Or tell us some of the better schools.
Okay.
And we're not singling anybody as being bad. We're talking about good. We're affirming the good schools.
Good programs.
At the moment, and that's going to all change.
I guess good colleges that have programs for students on the spectrum. Yeah. That's what you mean. And again, I want to caution with saying this, it so depends on the student and the fit. But I'll also say, Fred and I do this and do college counseling with families, and we're doing an increased amount of it, and I'm doing more than I would ever imagine. There are some programs that have more intensive assistance for students that offer more hours per week. I think there's two that come to mind. At the Marshall University in West Virginia has had the first program in the country for college students on the spectrum, and they have it's through their autism center, their Kelly Autism Center, which is right on campus. And it's a wonderful program, and they offer a lot for students on the spectrum. Mercyhurst College in Erie, Pennsylvania offers wonderful services and is one of the only two programs in the country that has a supported residential situation. They have a graduate student who lives in what used to be their graduate student residence hall that now is just for students on the spectrum in their program that they run. And the students that we all said, oh, is anybody really going to want to live with other students on the spectrum? The students who are there love it, and they're actually oversubscribed, and they're thinking of opening a second residence hall because the students really like being in a place with other people who share their interests and share the movies they want to watch, and if they want to watch Disney movies, they're comfortable doing that. And so, bless you, I think it's a wonderful opportunity if that's what people need. University of Connecticut has a very good support program. I helped start the program, but I work 40 miles away at the law school. But they have a very good program. A lot of the colleges in Pennsylvania that we're working with have really great programs, and they're going to spread throughout the state. There are only one or two in in California. UC Irvine is really the only state university in California, which is surprising. Santa Fe College in Florida, it's actually a very large community college of 25,000 students, and they're starting a program. They already have a number of students on the spectrum, and they're starting a program that deals with employment. So they're doing internships with students, which we are big proponents of because that's really what students need, is lots of rehearsal in the employment setting while they're getting that college degree. That's a few. There's more on the list on the website, College Autism Spectrum, and the new programs that are starting all the time. There are an increasing number. There tend to be pockets around the country which families really want someplace near home, and often they're not close to home.
It's interesting, some of the students in college I've seen have been most successful have been students who in high school basically were forced to go out and do something in the community. One person I know who's actually coming to Yale, his mom made him go to Kohl's and take a sales course. So he had to be working at Kohl's, he had to learn how to sell stuff. And he talked about how that was very helpful to him. It was structured, he had his task, he responded to questions, he could tell people where stuff was, how to scan it for the price. But again, it's teachable stuff. And he learned it in a setting where he was really required. He got some support, but he learned on his own, and it's been very successful for him.
Often it's those employment skills that even And employers are telling us when we're saying where is the block for students on the spectrum, they're saying, I will take a student with a work history who knows how to be an employee over a student who has a 3.9 or 4.0 GPA any day. I want someone that I know knows how to get to work on time, knows how to work with other people, knows how to dress for work and address other people over the person who might be the brightest person in the room. So what we really are trying to address with students is, you may still be the brightest person in the room, but let's get you those other skills so that we can put the whole package together and not have you just be the brightest person who's ever graduated from your program, but an employed person. Getting and keeping jobs is the goal that we're looking for. Getting people through college, we've been working on for a while. Now we want to work on those two transitions, the transition into college and the transition out of college into independent adulthood. Other questions?
You've talked a lot about things that colleges and parents and families can do to help. Would you have any advice for friends of students on the spectrum? Are there any resources for them to learn about how to help out or support their friends?
I think so. Increasingly colleges, even colleges without structured programs for students with autism, are providing peer mentors, especially social mentors. And I think the more inclusive we can be, the term a lot of college folks are using now is neurodiversity. One college is even running a neurodiversity initiative rather than an autism program, because they want to take the autism word out. I think more accepting you can be. A lot of people, even though we don't realize it socially, we feel uncomfortable if people dress very differently. We feel uncomfortable if people talk different or look different. And I think as friends, if we can maybe be more sensitive to people's sensory issues. As Fred mentioned, dining halls are so difficult for students, or busy bars, or busy eateries or cafes, that all that sensory stuff going on, maybe meeting with a friend that you know has some autistic tendencies or is neurodiverse, meeting with them in a quieter place, doing something more quiet, maybe not with a large group of people, but maybe just 2 or 3. I think that can help a lot.
It's a very good question. Let me follow up and then we'll stop because we're almost out of time. I went up to Wallingford a year or 2 ago and talked to the Boy Scouts. And the reason was the Boy Scouts had a kid who'd come in who had Asperger's, and I'm changing this a little bit to protect the child's confidentiality. But anyway, he could only talk about toasters. That's all he wanted to talk about was his toaster collection. He had a lot of toasters. And we got in a whole discussion about the A words, autism and Asperger's, and I realized part of the hang-up for the kids was they didn't understand what that was. It was also scary. And I said, okay, let's talk about this not as autism, Asperger's. Let's talk about this as a problem with learning. It's a social learning disability. Then we had a whole disability discussion. Do people know folks with glasses, hearing aids, canes? And that's a visual, verbal, obvious disability. Other kinds of disabilities are hidden, spelling disabilities. How many people know somebody with a learning problem? So then we got into this whole thing, and then we could have a talk about strategies. When the kid comes up to you and wants to talk about his toasters, what do you say? I would like to talk about something else that I'm interested to you. Or I would like to hear from you something you're interested in apart from the toasters. But again, to give in a positive, supportive way, good feedback that says you want to make a connection, and at the same time modeling how you do that. And I think approaching it through the kind of disability or route and the whole business about neurodiversity is probably much more fruitful than getting into all the A words, as I call them.
I think that's true. I love the question because I think increasingly, as I often tell people a little bit younger than myself, or a lot younger, this is really a societal issue. This is going to be your next door neighbors, the person running your dry cleaning, the people that are your kids' parents. Autism is just going to be a part of our life.
And many of the same things would be helpful to students on the spectrum, would be helpful to other college students. One of the things I've been pushing for so far unsuccessfully, we have great people here who know about anxiety management and strategies for anxiety management. You could do a workshop in a college, stress management, test anxiety, And it's applicable to everybody, not just to students with learning problems. Everybody has trouble with anxiety. And so it's the kind of thing that you can sort of build in more generic support that will be helpful to the whole community.
I agree.
Thank you very much, Jane.
Thank
you,
you.
audience.
Thank you.